Oh hi, one day I hope to have a ballad written for me, or at the very least, a dirty limerick. Robin Hood, no joke, has had over 100 adaptations for film and TV. There's also been plays, songs, Canadian Flower, and an Austrian airline that have used the Robin Hood name. Such are the blessings of a property that's in the public domain. But with a new Robin Hood film coming out next week in North America, I thought it would be good to go over some of the literary origins and 4 of the previous films based on the character. So put on your green tights, stick a feather in your cap, and prepare to commit some petty crime. Oh, sorry, this is my speech for my cat burglar meetup group. Well, that's embarrassing. Let's go back to a time of hardship, poor hygiene, and high illiteracy. That was England in the year 1370, or Winnipeg, Manitoba now. First and foremost, nobody can be really sure if Robin Hood was a real person or not. There's quite a bit of a debate over that. This is mostly because Robin, or Robert, was just a very popular British name, and Hood, no matter how you spell it, was also a very popular surname. There's also a possibility that because Hood is a way that certain people would have pronounced wood in those days, we should really be discussing the amazing exploits of Bobby Wood. Regardless of him being a real person or not, there is a reference to Robin Hood in the poem Pierce Plowman that was written in 1370. So at the very least, the legend of Robin Hood was alive by that point. Ballads and poems soon followed, but there was never really a consensus to the storyline. Robin Hood could be fit into any epic story that a storyteller wanted to tell, which is why sometimes he's of a lower class and sometimes he's a nobleman. He can be fair, childish, merry, or mean. But much like the Arthurian legends, at least in Western society, we know the characters and their archetypes. Little John, Friar Tuck, Maid Marian, Prince John, and maybe even some of the lesser known characters like Will Scarlet and Alan a Dale. But a lot of how we envision Robin Hood nowadays comes from the 19th century. Here, Robin Hood could very easily fit into the idea of the valiant Saxon taking on the evil Norman invaders. I'm by no means an historian, but the short background is that the Saxons, or Anglo-Saxons, are what we consider the British to be today, descendants of the Germanic tribes that crossed the English Channel to colonize Britain. The Normans were French. And that's what it always comes back to, right? The fight between England and France. One of the books to really make that analogy was written by Howard Pyle called The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, published in 1883, a full 100 years before I was born. What Pyle did was collect many of the ballads and stories that were floating around in the popular culture and try to weave a narrative between them all. And that's the book we're going to use as the basis for this video. This will be a good time to tell you that if you go in the description to this video, there are links to download or buy this book. But it's in the public domain, so I'd get the free version if you're interested. Pyle starts with this in his introduction. This country is not fairyland. What is it? 'Tis the land of fancy, and it is of that pleasant kind that when you tire of it, whisk, you clap the leaves of this book together and 'tis gone, and you are ready for everyday life with no harm done. So he's urging you to look at the book that's in your hands and not treat it very seriously. These are tall tales meant to enthrall, stories that are here to entertain you. From there, each chapter is a semi-self-contained story from the legends of Robin Hood. Most follow one of Robin's exploits, but there are a few that focus only on a member of the merry men that surround him. Which sounds super gay, right? And I mean that in the traditional sense of the word gay. But now that I think of it, kinda like the modern version too. The origin of this outlaw who lives in Sherwood Forest is that at 18, he was walking to an archery tournament, ran into some problems with a group of foresters, mistakenly killed one, I'd say in self-defense. That person was a relative of the Sheriff of Nottingham, and so Robin escaped into the woods to evade capture. He then proceeds to meet a bunch of people that we all know. Little John, who he meets while trying to cross a river, Friar Tuck, who he plays a prank on, and Alan a Dale, who Robin helps marry the love of Alan's life. Here's what I need to say right away about this book though. As much as it inspired the way that most people think about Robin Hood, it doesn't include 2 of the most important characters. Prince John isn't this mean royal who he goes to battle with. In fact, it's not until the final chapter that King John is introduced after King Richard passes away. The sheriff is the main bad guy, but even he disappears for most of the book after the first few chapters. However, the most surprising character that's left out is Maid Marian. There are a lot of bros in this book, so you'd think that the love interest of the main character would be eventually introduced. Maid Marian is referenced exactly twice. Once at the very beginning when Robin is thinking about her as he walks down a forest path, and then midway through the book when again he starts thinking about her. Just thinking, never seen. only thought about. I have no idea why. If Pyle was rewriting ballads anyway, couldn't he have found a way to include her in the story? The individual stories are there to have a bit of adventure, a small moral lesson, sometimes some songs, and occasionally a few pearls of wisdom, like this from A Wrathful King. When the flood cometh, it sweepeth away grain as well as chaff. And I think the entire idea of Robin Hood comes from his own mouth when he states, I take my tithes from fat priests and lordly squires to help those that they despoil and to raise up those that they bow down. It's not surprising that in the 50s there were some American schools that banned Robin Hood because they feared that it promoted communism. It's also interesting that Robin, except for one instance, doesn't kill people. He's like an old-timey Batman. The way the book ends is crushing, and it's something I'm really curious why no adaptation that I've seen has ever done. Granted, I haven't seen most of the 100+ adaptations. So in his later years, after he's been pardoned and fought alongside King Richard in the Crusades, he returns to Sherwood Forest. He decides he doesn't want to leave, and the new King John doesn't like that. King John sends a bunch of his men to kill Robin Hood, which Robin barely survives and becomes really ill. So he goes to his cousin, who is a prioress at a nearby nunnery, and asks for help getting better. She fears that she'll be in trouble for helping him, so she says she's going to do some light bloodletting, but she cuts deep into the wrong part of the arm, locks the door behind her, and lets Robin bleed out. It's pretty gruesome, especially for a book that was marketed towards kids. I mean, they can handle weird Voldemort babies, so I guess some dying of blood loss is cool. But still. However, I still say overall, I wasn't a big fan of the book, especially for a modern audience. I think it would bore most people to tears. And I say that as a person who loves Victorian fiction. Dickens, the Brontes, Thomas Hardy, and the Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories are all things that I still get enjoyment from. But this is a book that is much too stilted in language and doesn't really have a strong enough plot thread that takes you through all the stories. Plus, I want my Maid Marian. So that brings us to the first adaptation, the 1938 Errol Flynn starring film called Adventures of Robin Hood. I think it starts off great with the Machiavellian plans between Prince John and Sir Guy of Gisborne, and then Robin strolls right into the banquet hall and throws down a deer onto the table. It's such a fun FU. Overall, it's a fun enough film, certainly not as action-packed as what a modern film feels compelled to be, but I enjoyed the banter between the actors and everyone seems to be having a good time, which I think is important in this type of film. I'm not sure why older films do this, perhaps they thought it was dramatic, but they speed up action scenes. I just find it weird and off-putting. In this version, the sheriff is shown as a somewhat incompetent fool, so Robin is really fighting against John and Guy. Also the name of my new indie band. But Errol Flynn was meant to play Robin Hood. Claude Rains is loving being evil as he is, and Olivia de Havilland, who's still alive at 102, brings a grace and resourcefulness to Maid Marian, especially when she goes behind enemy lines. It's able to bring elements from the Robin Hood stories and modernize it for a 1930s audience, and when looked at in that context, I think this film accomplishes what it sets out to do. This is the kind of film I will revisit, but it will never be one of my favorites. Now it's time to put on some rose-tinted glasses and discuss the Disney animated version of Robin Hood. Watching this as an adult is eye-opening. Take for instance this frenetic scene just after the archery tournament. Little John is dressed as Sir Reginald, taking out bad guys, then he's dressed in his normal attire, and then, when he pulls Lady Cluck to safety, he's back to Sir Reginald. This is pretty indicative of this movie. It's famous to Disney nerds because of how troubled a production it was. I won't get into the whole thing here, but the pre-production phase went so long that they needed to reuse animation from older Disney films to finish on time. So you have scenes from Snow White, Jungle Book, and the Aristocats, and they drew over them. Not only that, but they essentially reuse animation from earlier in the movie. I have a feeling that there was probably a more involved storyline that they were intending to do, but just didn't have the time or budget to pursue it fully. This was a weird time for Disney. The 2 decades after Walt's death have curious entries into their filmography, although there are many cult favorites that I have during that period. But back to this movie, I watched this so much as a kid. This was a regular choice to be aired during the Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday nights while I was growing up, so I've probably watched it over 3 dozen times. They've taken many of the Robin Hood characters and made anthropomorphized animal versions out of them. Bears, foxes, chickens, rabbits, and then there's a few scenes that don't necessarily thread together. To be honest, it does feel like the book in a way. The movie is a few different scenes stitched together and called a movie. The fun is still there. Unlike most other Disney films, there aren't much for songs, although the first one that you hear would go on to be adapted into the worst of earworms for Hamster Dance, if you're old enough to remember that on the internet. This is the type of film that I call a rainy day movie. It feels like a warm blanket to snuggle up into when you're feeling blue. Because I've seen it so much and I like it, I can't hate on it too much. I think all the characters are fully realized, the voice acting is great, and the decision to use mostly southern accent for characters from England works for me. Scenes from this are burned into my mind. I don't think any of these scenes are borrowed from the Robin Hood stories except for the archery contest, but the final scene where Robin is on top of the castle trying to escape fire is still one of the best final scenes from a Disney film. But if you're coming to it for the first time now, I don't know how much you'd appreciate it. Next up is the Kevin Costner starring film Prince of Thieves, and this one, whew boy. It's not that it was attempting to be a gritty look at Robin Hood. I think that could work. It's not that Kevin Costner is the only person not even attempting a British accent, or that he looks like he's asleep for most of the film. No, it's that I'm not sure the filmmakers knew what type of film they were trying to make. It wavers from serious Oscar-type movie to ridiculous farce. Like Alan Rickman as the Sheriff of Nottingham is in a completely different movie. He chews every scene he's in. And the piece de resistance of a scene where, yeah. We start with the person's hand getting cut off, then a funny jaunt to find Maid Marian, then Alan Rickman being Alan Rickman. Then the introduction of the Merry Men works well, but then there's an entire plot with a witch who can apparently tell the future by randomly throwing things into a pan. Later she's revealed to be actually the mother of the sheriff. It's just, I don't really get the type of film they were trying to make. They do some of the famous scenes like the meeting of Little John and Friar Tuck. At the same time, they subvert our expectations with Maid Marian and bring in the character of Azim, played by Morgan Freeman. But with the additions they make going so far off script, I'm not even sure why they needed to call it a Robin Hood film. At the very least, we get this wicked shot, which is parodied in the Mel Brooks movie Men in Tights. Parody often comes when a genre grows tired or is overexposed. I don't think that there had been a ton of Robin Hood films in the early 90s, but Mel thought that he could satirize it nonetheless. It's mostly a parody and satire of Prince of Thieves. The sheriff looks like Alan Rickman's sheriff. They have the weird witch mother that's played by Tracy Ullman brilliantly. I have to say that this was also a movie I watched a bunch of times as a kid. My parents introduced me to Mel Brooks at a very early age, and to this day, Young Frankenstein is still my favorite comedy. But this movie has really not aged well. The jokes about people's names aren't really that funny. The fear of gays is a strong undercurrent to the plot, and Mel Brooks relies a lot on pandering to the audience by referencing some of his previous films, like History of the World and Blazing Saddles. That being said, there are some wonderful, funny, and insightful scenes. Carrie Always is able to look both credible as Robin Hood and can sell a joke, and it is true that he's one of the few Robin Hoods in Hollywood that speaks with a British accent. You again get some of the famous scenes like the archery contest and meeting Little John, but the plot isn't what's important here. It's the gags that they are stuffing into this movie. You can also see the strength of Mel Brooks' songwriting that would garner him so much praise when he went to Broadway with the producers a few years later. Overall, this was his second to last movie, and he was running out of steam. The handful of good jokes don't really make this a worthwhile watch anymore. Just watch those scenes on YouTube. There is no definitive version of Robin Hood. He can be whatever our culture wants him to be. We already saw that with the Saxons and Normans as they were brought in by Howard Pyle to accentuate that book for kids. But he can be funny, fearless, festive, or a fox. Also, it helps that it's in the public domain. You could go and make your own Robin Hood film right now, and it definitely will be better than Prince of Thieves. And so another version is coming out next week. It stars Taron Egerton and Jamie Foxx. We'll have to see how it compares, which we'll do next week. As of right now, it looks like it fits more with the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes films, rather than the traditional depiction of Robin Hood. But as we've already mentioned, this figure can be whatever you want it to be. And what I hope you want to be right now is the type of person who likes, comments, and subscribes. I feel dirty. But you also can follow me on social media. So dirty. We'll talk about the new film next week. Until next time, have fun reading, enjoy watching the film, and I look forward to talking about it with you. Have a great day. When I say Robin Hood, what characters just immediately come to mind?
A fox.
No.